Thanks very much. It's an honor to be here with Mike and Matt. I've got some slides, unfortunately, and I think it's going to be difficult for some of you to view it, but I'm going to try to be concise in explaining what's on the screen. I've been asked to go over what's come out in the last 12 months related to the financial side of the DEA's investigations into Hizballah money laundering and drug trafficking. What's emerged quite clearly has been a global conspiracy financially assembled, most likely from the top down, out of Beirut by a network of money launderers, many of whom are in the Lebanese diaspora around the world, but not all of whom are. Certainly not all of whom are Shia, although the majority are today, it appears. Combating that network has been basically the little agency that could, the DEA, and we can observe essentially three key elements in the DEA strategy over the last few years. The first one is the the pursuit of narco money launderers, most emblemized in the designation of Ayman Juma and the illicit group under the Drug Kingpin Act in January 2011. We'll talk a little bit about Ayman Juma and why he's important. The next brick in the strategy has been to pursue the bankers, most notably the Lebanese Canadian Bank, as a primary money laundering concern under Section 311 of the USA Patriot Act, provision that I worked with extensively when I was in government against Banco Delta Asia in Macau. And the third element has been the pursuit of the used car money laundering scheme, which is, as we'll show, a sort of vast and rather amazing conspiracy to launder funds out of West Africa and car parks. And this has been summed up, and it's well worth reading, in a $483 million Southern District of New York International Emergency Economic Powers Act forfeiture complaint, which came out in December of last year. At the center of the money laundering network has been one of the world's largest money launderers, Ayman Saeed Juma, of Medellin, Colombia, but now apparently of Beirut, Lebanon. The story of Juma, I think, will continue to emerge as he becomes prosecuted. I hope he's been unsealed. The indictment against him has been unsealed in the Southern District of New York for moving a massive amount of money for Los Zetas, among other organizations. So, Juma relied upon a network of exchange houses, which the Southern District document details as under effectively the command and control of Hizballah as an organization. They certainly were supportive of Hizballah. Hassan Ayash Exchange House and the illicit group of Lebanon, but which is also based in West Africa. These were exchange houses that could move hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars a year for their clientele, and did, into the United States. The key provisions of the Southern District's money laundering complaint were spelled out, as I said, in December of last year. One of the interesting things about this is that it names banks other than the Lebanese Canadian Bank as involved, specifically Middle East Africa Bank, the Federal Bank of Lebanon, and Bloom Bank were all involved in wiring funds to the United States to buy used cars, which were then transported to car lots in West Africa, where the proceeds of the used cars and the proceeds of cocaine, and West Africa has become the largest bridgehead for cocaine flowing into Europe and the Middle East and the world, were integrated and shipped in bulk form up to Beirut to be laundered through the Lebanese Canadian Bank and these other banks and these affiliate exchange houses, and the money was then piped primarily back in the United States, but also into Europe. Cash transported from West Africa was also often received, according to the Southern District complaint, at the Beirut airport, where Hezbollah security guards would escort the funds. Literally, people bringing in bags of money There have been some recent public incidents of this occurring, people carrying millions of dollars in suitcases, who are couriers, accredited couriers for the exchange houses, which the DEA has linked to Hizballah. Very importantly, as I said, is that Hezbollah-controlled money laundering infrastructure is used to launder the proceeds of hundreds of millions of dollars in narcotics, primarily Colombian cocaine, which today flows primarily out of Venezuela, another interesting government to be keeping one's eyes on as part of the scheme into West Africa. And here, the New York Times, which did a terrific job elucidating the scheme back in December. Joe Becker did an excellent article on this. What happens, as I said, is the money gets wired primarily from Lebanese, Canadian bank, and these other banks, and these exchange houses affiliated with the banks, some of which were even inside the bank, or inside the same building, to the U.S. Then the cars are bought, and you're going to look differently at used car dealerships around the country in the wake of this action. There have been 30 car dealerships which have been served with this complaint for a very substantial sum of money. The cars are shipped to West Africa. Then they're integrated, as I said, with the proceeds of the cocaine, and then the money's moved. It's this very elegant cycle. There's also another piece of it that's existing in East Asia related to China. Something seems to have happened around 2003. Now, certainly, one thing that did happen is the United States invaded Iraq. Another thing that happened is the Syria, Lebanon shift. But one thing you can observe based on imagery you can get publicly is that West African car parks in Benin didn't exist in 2002, in the beginning of 2003 for the most part. There were car parks, but the parks which are figured in the DEA cases weren't there. Today, you can probably see them from space. They're so large. There's so many thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially, cars going through here. I can't count cars from little bitty images, but it's incredible. In 2002, this is the car park, which is the illicit car park, was basically barren. 2007, it starts to fill up. And, I don't know, it looks to me like there's like 30,000. I was trying to figure out the number of cars that could be parked there, but we'll leave it to the experts. But it's a vast amount of cars. And, of course, they're constantly moving through there, according to the published reports. And there have been some interesting doctoral dissertations written about the used car trade in West Africa without really understanding why it exists. And the key thing as a money laundering expert is that this doesn't make economic sense. Used cars make sense. But the reports that have come in from the investigations and come out publicly is that they're paying more money in these car auctions in the U.S. than the cars are actually worth. And they're still shipping them. This is not a high-margin business at the very least. For it to be involved in generating billions of dollars, which is making its way over a 5-year period into Lebanese banks, it doesn't stack up logically. It's way too profitable business to be this profitable, okay? I mean, way too unprofitable business to be this profitable. Today, as of November at least, the car parks are even larger. And hopefully the impact, and I can't vouch for this, of the December Southern District of New York action against the actual used car dealers in the United States will have a strategic impact. And you can see that the car parks just get bigger. Well, what gets bigger at the exact same time? And this is a true financial miracle as a financial history guy. The Lebanese banking system. Lebanon gets bombed, and it suffered terrible damage and tragic damage, frankly, in August of 2006, in what I think was an unforeseen war for both Hezbollah and for the Israelis. But what one would not expect to see in a country which has as much debt to GDP as Lebanon, which is, I think, has the highest debt to GDP of any country in the Middle East, would be a financial boom in the wake of Reconstruction. Reconstruction is an extraordinarily costly endeavor. I mean, one can applaud the Lebanese for reconstructing their economy, but what one can't applaud is the massive surge in deposits of non-residents and of members of the Lebanese community in the Lebanese banking system. The Lebanese banking system essentially doubled or tripled, depending on how one wants to configure it, between 2006 and 2011. the data is what it is. It was a huge surge in financial growth, almost without precedent in the Middle East, although Lebanon's banking system has been growing at a steady clip for a long time. And that's been a good thing for Lebanon. But what's coincidental, and what's actually more than coincidental, is the rise of those car parks and the movement of billions. And when I say billions of dollars, in the Southern District Action, it details over $1.2 billion declared at the Togo-Ghana border, which made its way apparently into Lebanese banks just in 2007 alone. One has to ask yourself, where does one get $1 billion in bulk cash? Well, the place where you get $1 billion in bulk cash most easily these days is in places like Panama, which are also dollarized, where you're seeing the largest drug trafficking cartels in the world operating. In a recent case against a guy named Giorgio Shaitelli, a Hezbollah money launderer there, can illuminate a little bit of the relationship between Panama and Lebanon. I'm in Juma, of course. You wouldn't necessarily know, but for those of us who studied this case, was based in Panama and Lebanon. These things aren't coincidences. That's where you're generating billions of dollars in bulk cash. This is just an academic study of the foreign currency deposited by residents in the Lebanese banking system, which is about 70% dollarized. It's just remarkable, almost ridiculous amounts of growth. The foreign exchange reserves and gold reserves of the Lebanese central bank tell a similar story. See how it's flat from 2004 2006. War comes and it skyrockets. One man's miracle is another man's conspiracy. The fastest growing bank in Lebanon over the last decade was the Lebanese Canadian Bank, which not incidentally was the bank that was most centrally involved in the finances of Hizballah as an organization, according to the Southern District documents and the Department of Treasury's designation of the bank. It just had ridiculous growth rates. It had bought the hulk of Bank Al-Medina, a rather infamous bank that failed in 2003, again, a year that will go down in sort of infamy financially related to this network. And then in 2007, it just continued to just skyrocket in growth. The Southern District of New York document details the official accounts of Hezbollah entities that were in the Lebanese Canadian Bank, at least some of them. This was a bank that, from all appearances, was involved in command control financially, not only of a vast narco money laundering network, one of the largest in the world, but also the Hezbollah leadership finances. And the finances, including of the User Company for finance investments, sort of the Goldman Sachs of Hezbollah for making loans to businesses. And Hezbollah, it's very important to understand, it's become a big business. You can see it in Lebanon. They've encroached on every aspect of the economy. And by all accounts, they're relatively shrewd businessmen, but they also seem to have embraced illicit finance as a main source of revenue. Those illicit financial networks connect back into Hezbollah's unofficial treasury and treasurer, Hussein al-Shami, according to the Southern District document. And the key thing is the Lebanese Canadian Bank, which apparently even had a senior Hezbollah finance operative inside the bank, was not only aware of what was going on, they were deeply complicit. And that's the basis for the Treasury Department taking the Section 311 action against the Lebanese Canadian Bank as a primary money laundering concern. That is a very high hurdle to reach. You just can't do that against anyone. Basically, that bank existed more than any other reason to launder money. It's also important, and I should point out one last thing in this regard, that the Treasury's Section 311 complaint on money laundering involving the Lebanese Canadian Bank, which cut it off from the U.S. and collapsed the bank, I should point out, it was a $5.5 billion bank in terms of deposits as of February 2011, and today it doesn't exist except within the Societe Generale Bank of Lebanon, another bank which, frankly, has some suspicious ties, according to things you can find that have come public recently. But another piece of this that was vaguely described in the 311 complaint was Iran's official access to LCB and key managers who provided them with banking services. I think that obviously also is a very important piece of this puzzle, especially as we start to look at other banks in Lebanon. And, of course, Undersecretary Cohen has been in Lebanon for, I think, the last 2 days, meeting related to Iran and Syria's access to the Lebanese banking system and also the Lebanese Canadian Bank issue. The interesting thing is the Section 311 designation of Lebanese Canadian Bank in February of last year triggered what looks to me as a run on the Lebanese financial system, even though it doesn't show up exactly in the banking data, which continues to expand. It's a little strange. But the balance of payment data shows an incredible cascading drop in terms of funds outflow from Lebanon, which is really unprecedented. I don't think that's the intention of the U.S. government. I don't think they're out to financially punish Lebanon. What they're out to do is enforce the law, and the Lebanese financial system has unfortunately become integrated in breaking American law. Hopefully not in all elements, but unfortunately in the case of Lebanese Canadian Bank and the other banks detailed, there's clear evidence. I guess I wrote Lebanese strategy needy. It's supposed to be needed. My conclusion related to Lebanese banks is that Hezbollah's money laundering activities have placed numerous Lebanese banks at grave risk of severe sanction. But Iran and Syria's use of Beirut to skirt sanctions against Iran could jeopardize the entire Lebanese banking system. The Lebanese financial system is based around the dollar, and anything the U.S. government does to limit access to the ability to clear dollar transactions in the U.S. will have a tremendous effect on it. If it comes down to a choice between maintaining the Lebanese banking system, which has been thriving, obviously, and supporting Hezbollah, Syria, and Iran, one would hope that the Lebanese government would choose maintaining the Lebanese banking system. That is a strategic decision it's going to have to make. Lebanon has the potential, of course, for a decisive turn of events against the Hezbollahization of its state, society, and economy. It is in the U.S. strategic interest to support a movement inside Lebanon to actively oppose Hezbollah and Iran's pernicious grip on the country, as well as increasingly in Syria. Hezbollah, based on what I've learned from watching the DEA investigation, could be pursued viably as a narco-terror cartel a la the FARC if it were decided. To sum things up, I think there's also a basis to do something that's a more structured effort involving the U.S. and other foreign governments like we conducted against North Korea as a non-kinetic way of applying pressure. I do not personally believe that the military options are in any way desirable to Iran or Lebanon, but I do think we need to have decisive pressure options to try to curtail the influence of Hezbollah in Iran. And in the case of Kim Jong-il's illicit financial web, which I targeted and pursued as a senior official in the State Department for 5 years, we created an illicit activities initiative. This was also then against Milosevic in the Balkans to great strategic effect, targeting their illicit financial networks as a means of exploiting their vulnerability to law enforcement, plain and simple. Not intelligence, not counter-terrorist operations, law enforcement. The problem with this is coordination. In a report I wrote last January for the Center for New American Security, I talked about the North Korea and Balkans experiences, and it all boils down to coordination at the center. And unfortunately, coordination is a big challenge in any government, including the United States government. But I do think the basis, thanks to the great work that the DEA has done in the last 5 years, exists for a more effective pursuit of the illicit finances of both Hezbollah and their Iranian patrons. And look forward to your questions.